Oh, there's Elizabeth.
Hi there, everyone.
Oh.
So we're just getting about ready to start our webinar here. So I just want to introduce myself really quickly. So welcome to Understanding Executive Function. My name is Elizabeth Ross. I am a teacher and curriculum developer here at Research ILD. My fabulous co-hosts, Kim Davis and Michael Greschler, are just coming on. While we wait for any stragglers that are on their way, I just wanted to give you a few business items. Okay, so first off, we're going to be sharing our screen with you and showing a sort of PowerPoint. The text on that can get a tiny little bit small if you don't have your screen full screen. So up at the top of the screen where you see my face, there's a little red button that says full screen. If anything gets a little small, just click that. It'll make it a little bit bigger, easier to use. On the other hand, you can see there is a chat window to the side of the screen where you see my face. If you have any questions going through the webinar, you can just put those there. Our main speakers probably won't see those pop up. If I see them, I'll go ahead and answer them, or we'll just log them there because we're going to have a little Q&A at the end of the sort of webinar proper. Also, we have under the questions tab, we have a few questions that some of you have already put in. We have a few answers there, but it's something that's a great place to sort of chat back and forth with everybody who is also listening to this webinar. So I think that's most of the business things we have there. Also, if you have any problems technically, put those into the chat window. I'll be looking out for them. I'll chat back and forth with you. 99.9% of the time, anybody has any issues, just refresh your browser page, and that's to just solve any of it. All right? But if not, do let me know. So I think without any further ado, I'll hand it over to my fabulous co-hosts.
All right.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you. So why don't we get started? We have plenty to cover today, but we're very excited to be hosting you guys for this webinar. Executive function is something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. We figured we'd just start with a brief introduction before we dive into the material. So I'm Michael Greschler. I'm the director of the SMARTS Executive Function Program, which you'll be hearing a little bit about. Not only do I work for the SMARTS Executive Function Program, working with schools, working with teachers, I also am an educational specialist. I work one-on-one with students to develop executive function strategies. So I kind of have many different perspectives on executive function, and I think I'm a great person to be on this webinar, in my opinion. Kim, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. My name is Kim Davis. I am a senior associate for research and teacher training here at Research ILD. Also passionate about working with kids and adults and whatnot around executive function. My background is a little bit about my background. So I'm a former special education teacher, many years of teaching, and I've kind of seen the special ed and education thing from both angles. Also doing some doctoral study work around special education and teacher education. So we're so happy to have you guys here today.
All right, so let's take a look at our agenda for the day. We're going to start off by answering this very important question that brought us all here today. What is executive function? And a theme that I really want to focus on today is, yes, we'll be talking about some of the research and some of the paradigms and some of the important frameworks of executive function, but our whole goal in answering this question and answering all the questions there is to talk practical. What are practical and concrete ways to view executive function in our day-to-day lives and the lives of our students? We'll also talk about, once again, that concrete approach to assessment, to teaching. We'll take a look at one of the strategies from SMARTS, an ISEE strategy, and any time we have left over, we'll spend on Q&A. Now, I'm a very fast talker, but we have a lot to cover, so we'll see which one wins out. If I'm talking too fast, though, just type it in, and I'll try to slow myself down.
I also should let everybody know.
So just a little bit about our organization. So we are the Research Institute for Learning and Development in Lexington, Massachusetts. We're a nonprofit organization that works with students with learning differences, developing executive function strategy programs that really kind of transform the game for them. We are really strength-based. We're all about kind of strategies that empower students instead of making them feel like they only have weaknesses. In addition to the SMARTS program, which you'll hear about, we run conferences, trainings, and workshops around the country. We also have a number of publications and this and that. So if you'd like to explore our website, I hope that you will. We're a very unique organization because we have a sister the Institute for Learning and Development, which is a learning center also here in Lexington. We share an office. And it's a learning center that provides neuropsych evaluations as well as one-on-one educational services. So many of the strategies that we use in our nonprofit side are kind of developed in the lab of the Institute of ILD. So we're very lucky to have that kind of research, theory, and practice all embedded in the same office. You're going to hear a fair amount about the SMARTS executive function curriculum today. This is the curriculum that we've created to teach strategies to students who are struggling with executive function. And I like to share it with you guys because whether or not you're looking for something like that, the goals, the outcomes of the SMARTS program are really in line with what you're going to learn today. When you talk about executive function, you need to be teaching strategies with a capital S, and we'll be covering that today, to help students be more motivated, to build their self-awareness. You never teach executive function in isolation. When students learn strategies and learn more about who they are as learners, they are more resilient, they're capable of leveraging their talents and be more successful in school and in life. Okay. So finally, we've got to this very important and very difficult question: what is executive function? So I could, try to ask you and make you answer, but I'm not going to. Since you're here, we're gonna tell you what we think executive function means. But before we do that, I want to share a little something. So when I'm working with students and they come to me for executive function strategies, I ask them, what is executive function? On the very first time I met them, what is executive function? And a lot of students are like, I don't know, you tell me. They're teenagers, so they're very surly about it. But let me show you a few of the responses I've gotten. Okay, here's a 9th grade student. I said, what is executive function? And he says, I don't know what it is, but I know I don't have it. Right? Here's another one, an 11th grader who had been in IEP for most of his life, and he'd been in a number of IEP meetings. And I said, what is executive function? And he says, it's the stuff that I'm bad at. Right? So he's been in those IEP meetings. He's heard a number of times, I'm not good at executive function. And finally, look at the 6th grader. Is doing whatever the teacher says, right? So each one of these students is coming at executive function from a place of weakness, from a place of, this is something I cannot do. And if you are going to work on executive function with your students, you cannot allow this mentality to stand. Absolutely not. Executive function is a part of your everyday life. You couldn't get dressed in the morning. You couldn't brush your teeth. You could never go to the movies or, hang out with your friends if you weren't engaging executive function. So we need to frame executive function in a way that is not all about what students can't do, but about developing strategies so they can do the things they want to do in their day-to-day lives. Now, of course, many students do struggle with executive function. That's why we're all here. We know that our students are looking for help to overcome the challenges that are facing them. So why? Why is executive function such a challenge these days? Well, a lot of it has to do with the demands that are placed on our students. Okay, we ask a lot from our students. And over the course of the day, they're going from class to class. They're being asked to do complicated assignments. They're being asked to do small assignments. They're being asked to take notes. They're being asked to pay attention. They're being asked to read actively. So when we have high demands of our students, the executive function demands go up. Also, in this day and age, the increasingly modern and world of technology reduces the executive function capacity of many of our students. If I think about, I've got my phone right here. What if I want to check Facebook? What if I want to Google something about a movie that's coming up? So that is limiting the amount of bandwidth that our students are able to use. Oh, I almost just checked Facebook. Let me put that away. The technology is limiting the amount of focus that students have, and that is going to kind of create this perfect storm. When students have overwhelming priorities and they're constantly being distracted by technology, they get simply overwhelmed. They might be smart, but they are totally stuck. They're totally blocked. So this idea of a clogged funnel is something that comes from Dr. Lynn Meltzer, who I should have mentioned. She is the president of our organization, and she really loves this as a paradigm for executive function challenges. When students are being asked to do something that is, when they're being asked to do too much, when they don't don't have the ability to synthesize and prioritize and achieve, the funnel gets clogged. So no matter what they know, no matter what they're truly capable of, they aren't able to produce. And that is the hallmark of executive function challenge. But now we're going to take a step back and look at the components of executive function, the role they play in students' lives, and how you can use that understanding to help students realize they're not only bad at executive function. Kim, you ready?
Great. Okay. Yes. Thanks, Michael. Okay, so the visual that you see here is sort of what we say are the 5 elements of executive function. Now, like other things in education, there's always debate around what the actual 5 items are, what they should be called. Some researchers will say there's 4 elements or there's 3 elements. Some will say there's 6. So here at Research ILD, we have identified these 5 elements as sort of the most critical areas of executive function. So we're going to take a look at each of these areas and sort of the things that we see as kind of practical approaches we can do with our students. And that's really what drives our identification of these items, is that we are all about strategies. So we are all about what we can see, what we can actually do hands-on in the classroom with our students, with ourselves, to make an impact. So we're going to look a little bit at the elements and what they look like. So let's start looking at the first one here, cognitive flexibility. So cognitive flexibility is the ability to think flexibly and to shift perspectives and approaches easily. Simple enough, right? Well, let's think about our day. You probably had to shift flexibly hundreds of times today. So it seems like we all should be able to do this. Not all kids, this is not easy for all kids. Dr. Meltzer actually sees cognitive flexibility as key. This is really important to executive function, just for adapting new strategies and just for daily life, just for everything you do in daily life. Think about your morning. Michael mentioned, getting up and getting dressed. Think about how much you have to shift in the morning just to get dressed. You put your shirt on, you have a spot on it, you have to change. Well, now that's a shift you have to make, right? You were planning on wearing that one outfit, now you need to pick another outfit. That's a shift. So when we look at it from the student's lens, let's think about some of the things in the classroom where students would be have some demands to shift cognitively. So we ask our students to build on topics they learn from one content area to another. So they might learn the strategy of writing or the skill of writing with their English language arts teacher in one lesson, but then they have to transfer that to a different content area. So now their writing skills and bring it into social studies and do some writing in social studies. So now we're having to shift a little bit as they're doing that learning in that class. A big one is shifting between main ideas and details. That's often we see kids struggle with this, right? That's a real demand on cognitive flexibility, seeing the big idea and then having to go back into the little idea, the details, and then often having to shift back out to the main idea. So again, you're asking your brain to shift back and forth quite rapidly. Some of the strategies that we suggest for cognitive flexibility, we call one of these strategies our yellow page, we call it, because you ask your students to do a little highlighting. We're going to identify the main idea and some details that support that main idea, right? Give them a highlighter and off they go. So what happens? What do we get? We get the yellow page, right? The whole page is yellow page syndrome. So one of the suggestions we see here is maybe use multiple colors. So the main idea might be yellow, the details might be pink. So that's one suggestion that we might be able to do there. It's been interesting. We've actually done this with teachers as well, with adults as well, asking them to highlight. And even with adults, you go through so quickly and highlight the important things, but you don't necessarily identify the main idea from the details. So even if we said to an adult, okay, quickly tell me the main idea, may not happen, right? Because it's something that you highlighted, but it could be one of a million things on a page. So that's a strategy. Another thing that we discuss with cognitive flexibility is multiple word meanings. This often catches students off guard, trying to identify the multiple meanings that words might have. So just a quick, fun little example. We've seen teachers do this in their classroom. I thought this was actually just a really fun activity. So she gave the students a word. Each of the students actually had pairs of students had different words. say for example, vegetable stand, right? So one had to draw a vegetable stand. So they drew, you know, the little stand, the little cart with potatoes and broccoli and whatever else you might find. And then the other student drew Mr. Broccoli with feet. So vegetable stand, right? So we're helping students to understand that words can have multiple meanings and how to, the value of shifting cognitively. I also want to mention here, and you're going to hear this a million times throughout, you will hear Michael and I talk about this or mention this 100 times today, is the thought about reflecting on their learning and reflecting on themselves as learners. How do they shift flexibly? Do they shift flexibly? And if they do, what strategies work for them? If they don't, what strategies do we need to help them develop? So it's about identifying if they have the strategy, great, and if they don't, how can we help them develop a strategy for that? Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
Absolutely not. I think you've really hit the nail on the head. And I'm really glad you mentioned what Dr. Meltzer says about cognitive flexibility. It's really one of the most important entry points to being a strategic learner. So yes, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So let's look at the next one, which is goal setting. So goal setting, it's interesting because when you ask people, you know, maybe non-teachers or anyone what executive function is, often they'll say it's setting goals. This seems to be what people will often just identify with executive function. It is a very important part of executive function. It's sort of like, you know, we say executive function is goal-directed behavior. So goal setting refers to the ability to identify a desired outcome based on an awareness of your personal strengths and challenges. So again, that's really key. Having students, you know, understand who they are as learners. So goals can be long-term. They can be something that's going to be accomplished in a year, 5 years, or short-term. It might be something that we're going to get accomplished today, tomorrow, next week, depending on the situation. But students, again, we think that students may naturally set goals, but not all students do, or not all adults do, actually. So I think, you know, keeping in mind that there's a few issues that could happen around goal setting. So the first one could be just that students are not goal setting, or not setting goals. The second thing could be that they identify a goal, but they don't have steps to get there. So they haven't identified, you know, they know where they want to be, but they haven't identified how they're going to get there. So kind of don't see the end at the, you know, the end point. The other thing that can happen is the goals are outrageous, you know, some pie in the sky goal, and no steps again to get there. You know, I want to be a professional dancer, or I want to, you know, go to the moon, or I want to be a straight A student, but, you know, right now I have very low grades, or whatever. There's a lot of different goals that it could be. So again, the part of the strategy here with goal setting is really helping students become good goal setters, or having strategies to become goal setters, and monitoring their learning towards their goals along the way. So again, this is where we bring in our reflection. That reflection piece is so huge with all of our strategies. So if you're setting goals, you want to have the students be reflecting, like, is this a good goal for me? Am I making progress toward my goal? If I'm not, how can I shift, right? How can I find different ways to make sure that I am going to hit that goal? So you're also starting to see here, the first visual that we showed with all of the 5 elements of executive function was actually a very mindful visual. And people don't always pick up on the gears first time around, but the gears sort of indicate that one makes the other go round. So you need all of them intact, or you need to have, you know, some strategies for all of them to have a smooth executive function profile. So when one gets out of whack, when your goal setting is off, or your cognitive flexibility is off, everything can be impacted. So that's sort of the connection between all of them. And the other thing about goal setting, the reason, the importance of goal setting is it can be really impactful, both positively and negatively. So, you know, if a student doesn't have goals, it can lead to lack of motivation. If you don't know what you're working towards, then you really aren't motivated to do what you need to do to get there. You know, so that can really impact a social emotional learning. And we talk about that often also when we're talking about executive function, is the academic impact, but also the impact on the behavior and the social emotional learning of students. So always, keep that in mind as we're going through some of these strategies. Michael, anything you want to add?
You're doing great.
Okay. All right, so let's look at, I want to say one more thing about goal setting. And this is, just things that we see with teachers. I just saw this fabulous lesson that I thought was just so fun. This particular teacher does a lot of goal setting in her classroom with her students. So she really is about making everything visual. So she uses a lot of visuals in her classroom. So she creates, so for the students, she has them create a visual of their endpoint, so what they're working towards, whatever it happens to be. The example, actually, if you saw my picture on the intro webinar, the example that I had was kids were working towards having some time on the iPad. So she helped them break down what they were going to need to do into 4 parts. So they had 4 steps that they needed to do, or 4 tasks that they needed to finish. She physically made a puzzle with the 4 pieces. And as the students finished a task, they put one of the items, it was sort of like a stick-on piece, onto a board so that they could see themselves, they could visualize themselves working towards their goal. And then when the iPad had the 4 pieces, they could visualize that they had reached their goal. So again, just a fun little thing that you can do as you're working with your students towards that goal. All right, let's see. Next one, let's talk about, all right, organizing and prioritizing. This one seems to be a real common one that we hear from teachers that is a real struggle in their classrooms. So you can see our little friend here with his backpack. That's organizing and prioritizing nightmare. We see that all the time with students and sometimes with ourselves. And then also the time, just kind of where's the time? How am I tracking my time? So organizing, prioritizing involves creating a meaningful structure for ordering parts into a cohesive whole. Prioritizing involves ordering these parts based on relative importance. So we have a few things going on here, right? So we're looking at, first of all, the organizing piece, just kind of identifying what those structure is or what the parts are, and then prioritizing it, and then taking all of those parts and doing something with them. So that's the prioritizing piece of it. So teachers will say that this is a great place to start. So if a teacher had to pick one strategy they were going to start with, this would probably be it, right? Because sometimes a teacher's worst nightmare is a student's desk. It's what they can't find anything. They've lost their materials. They're coming without things. They're coming with the wrong things. And then academically, some of the tasks that we look at is, for example, writing multiple paragraph essays. Often kids will sit down to write an essay or multiple paragraphs or even a single paragraph, and they just don't know where to start, right? So you see that student with all kinds of information and doesn't know where to put them together. So doesn't know how to put that essay together, has the thoughts, but can't put them together, or can't identify, as we said previously, the main idea from the details. So can't really tell what goes where. Organizing and prioritizing is a huge thing with kids these days because of their busy schedule. So they think that they can't get things done because, they don't have time, or they don't have, they've got other things that are more important. Interesting, this was actually another funny, we learn most of our things, by the way, from observing teachers and from discussing with teachers. So Michael and I can't claim fame to any of these ideas. These are all thanks to all of you wonderful teachers out there. But we had a teacher, and I thought this was a great task. He worked with a group of boys. He was a basketball coach. So if you're out there, he actually might be out there. So if you're listening, you'll know who you are. And he was trying to get his students to understand the importance of prioritizing. So he's working with a group of middle school boys, and they love basketball. Basketball was their thing. And so they had their goal, right? So they had that goal. However, what they kept saying to him is that I don't have time to study for my test. I'm too busy. I have a lot going on, right? So I just can't find time to do it. So he gave them sort of this little task to do, which I thought was really fun. So they had to go through their whole day. So from the minute they woke up in the morning, and they had to track the time that they spent on every task. So how long it took them to get out of bed, how long to pick their clothes, to get dressed, brush their teeth, did they watch TV, their ride to school, what they did all day. So then he had them come back, and they all chatted about sort of what their what it looked like, what their day looked like. And then they were trying to figure out where in their day was actually sort of want to do, have to do. So they were identifying the tasks that they had to do. You have to brush your teeth in the morning, right? You have to ride the bus to school. You don't necessarily have to play your video game in the morning. I'd like to do that. But so anyway, he had them look at those chunks of time to see if there were anywhere that they could find time that they could free up. So for example, if they had to study for a test, where could they put that time without, taking away from something else that was valuable to them, such as basketball practice. So it was interesting. One of the boys, as I was observing, identified, wow, I'm on the bus for 2 hours a day. I ride an hour to school in the morning, and I ride an hour to school in the afternoon. If I organize my things right, I can use that time to study. So again, just a really fun little thing to ask kids to kind of look at their day and organize, and even do it yourself. You'll probably find very interesting when you look at your own day and how you spend time. So that's organizing and prioritizing. Michael, anything you want to add there?
No, I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's a great place to start. It's often a very obvious area of executive function difficulty. It's one of our most popular SMARTS lessons, actually. So organizing stuff, if you can teach it, very powerful, very powerful.
Great, awesome. Okay. Oh, I want to mention actually one more thing about organizing, because the writing piece, as I mentioned, it's sort of that hierarchical, kind of taking steps backwards. Just an example, this one actually, we just saw this week, and I thought this was great, and then I'll move on. Project-based learning seems to be a really big buzzword right now. A lot of schools are doing some awesome things with project-based learning, and we have a few schools that we're working with. Project-based learning also introduces a whole big pile of executive function challenges, both from a teacher perspective and from a student perspective. So one of the big skills to teach kids, I think, and it's interesting because outlining, I think we always used to think of outlining for older students, but we have some really young kids doing some outlining, and I think that's a really neat strategy to teach kids how to do sort of backward mapping their reading and writing or outlining. So working memory, this one is, we always talk about this as sort of being the brain's internet, or the brain's sort of map of functioning. It's sort of how information is organized in your brain. So working memory is the ability to hold information in one's mind and mentally manipulate this information. Again, some people have a real strength here. They can do mental math quickly, many numbers, 6, 7, 8 digit numbers, and they can do lots of calculations. Other people really struggle with this. And this actually is a real heated area of research for many reasons. But one of the reasons is just because there's always debate around working memory and if you can actually impact working memory. So if you have struggles with or challenges with working memory, can you impact that? And some researchers will tell you, nope, you're doomed. If you don't have good working memory strategy, sorry, you're doomed. And many others, like us, agree that you can strengthen your working memory with appropriate strategies. So let's look at a couple things with working memory. Okay, so this actually can really kind of think about our funnel way back when, and this is where the funnel really can get clogged quickly. Students are trying to take in so much information, just even in their day-to-day life, they're thinking about what you're teaching, they're thinking about what they have to do after school, they're thinking about what's in your classroom, environmentally, what the classroom is set up like, and then they're also trying to focus on the task at hand, right? So there's just a lot going on in that, that students have to manage in their memory. So let's see. So some of the tasks that students might be faced with day to day in their school is, for example, performing multi-step problems, right? So you've got to remember what the problem is, so what you're looking for information, each of the steps, and then where you are, what step you're on, right? Recalling how to do the procedures. So there's lots of things there that you're kind of held responsible for that you're needing to remember. One of the things that's interesting, this actually came from my own child. He's analyzing the way America's education is today. But he was, we were talking about kind of tests, giving tests or taking tests. And, he said, Mom, sometimes you're really not getting tested on the information, you're really getting tested on your ability to remember, your ability to remember the steps in a word problem or the steps to solving problems, not necessarily how to do it or not necessarily demonstrating that you can do it. So that was really interesting. So and again, this comes from a teacher, and her practice is that she really looks at each task and figures out, is it a memory task or is it a certain, something that she's actually looking for a student to perform? And that's how she really designs her instruction day to day, which I thought was very insightful, both from my child and from a teacher perspective. And I don't think we always think about that. But the other kinds of strategies that you can do, and I thought, again, this is cute. This actually comes from one of our books. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I forgot to turn my phone off. This actually comes from one of our books, and I thought this was really cute. Using mnemonics or using stories to remember important information. So for example, the 13 colonies, that's a lot of information to remember, right? So making up a silly little story about, the story actually is about Virginia the cow, and she likes to sing Christmas carols. So we've learned Virginia and the Carolinas. So we've now memorized that, right? So that's just a strategy or a tool that can help us with our working memory. The other things are like mnemonics, so teaching kids to use mnemonics and visuals, any kind of pictures. And again, self-reflection here is really huge. Quickly you can tell if a strategy is going to work for you or not, or a student can tell. And having them, encouraging them to talk about the strategies that they're using is very important. Michael, anything there?
No, I think you did that very well. I mean, think of working memory as kind of your internet connection. And think about if our internet connection is getting maxed out, maybe we're closing windows, we're trying to streamline what we do. And that's what we want our strategies to do, to make our students work more efficiently so that their bandwidth, so that their working memory or their internet connection isn't being overwhelmed.
Great, thank you. Okay, this one actually is, I think, my favorite if I had to pick one. So self-monitoring, hold on, let me catch up to us here. Okay, self-monitoring and checking. This is one that I just think is so powerful, both in school and just in life in general. And especially as we're having kids do, projects, work together, some collaborative work. I think the self-monitoring and self-checking is just so important and so impactful in so many different situations. And we also, just to point out, we sort of look at them as two separate things. So self-monitoring is a student's ongoing process of reflecting and using strategies to track their performance and outcomes. So that's ongoing. So it's not just like an in-the-moment thing, that's ongoing. So for example, you can see our friend here, she's on the computer. She's saying, am I on task right now? So, checking to see, or self-monitoring, are you on the computer doing the task that you need to do, or are you shopping or searching for some other information or messaging with your friend? So, and the other part of it is just the strategy we want to teach is if you're monitoring yourself and you find you're not in the right space, how can I readjust my strategy so I can get back to the right space, so I can get back to the task at hand? And this one I think is a really important one. We haven't really mentioned the modeling, the importance of modeling, but this one is a great spot, I think, for us to discuss that. Teachers modeling or adults modeling for students is so important. So modeling what you do to self-monitor and check. So monitor yourself and check yourself. So how do you monitor that you're on task to do the things that you need to do? Let's see. All right, checking occurs either during the task or after the task has been completed. You can carefully review and check your assignments using your knowledge of your errors. So lots of things, again, with self-checking. That's sort of more like if you've taken a test or you're writing a paper and you want to just check, do I have my name on it? Did I answer all the questions? Is my paragraph, periods, capitals, whatever task you happen to be working on? And I think, differentiating between the two is very important. They're both very important, but differentiating between the two is also very important. This is sort of to raise awareness for students of their own learning. So helping students really identify what kind of habits they have and fixing any habits that need to be fixed. So we use the example, actually this is a great strategy I think to use in your classroom, is we call it the top 3 hits. So asking students to look at their tests, for example, and see if they can identify a pattern of errors. So if they are always losing points on their test because they have blanks, they haven't filled out, left a question blank or don't complete all the questions, then, perhaps the strategy they could use is the next time they take a test, at the top of their test, write, make sure I answer all questions. So that will cue them into trying to monitor or check that they are, doing all of the questions. So again, it's just about helping them to self-monitor or to check. Now, as teachers, we can say to them, Johnny, did you check to make sure you filled in all the responses or all the blanks? Of course we can do that. However, if we can try to help them develop their own sense of strategy or to own their strategy, that's something that they will do not only in your classroom, but in other classrooms and in grades, throughout the next year, and even into adulthood. So again, it's about teaching them that strategy. And again, just really modeling what you're doing. We know we use our executive function strategies all the time. They're crucial for us especially as adults. We're just so busy. They're very important. However, we don't always talk out loud about our strategies. We don't always say, oh, in my book bag, I put my keys at the same spot every time so I know where they are. And when I need to get, out the door, I can grab them quickly. So by modeling some of the strategies that we use or asking students to share the strategies that they use, really helping our students develop some good habits for good strategies. Michael, anything there?
No, that point of modeling cannot be made strong enough. I'm going to say it again later. I love it.
Awesome. Yes, it's very important. Awesome. Okay, so this final area, let's see, did we share this? Okay. Oh, sorry, go back for a second. Oh, just a couple more examples, challenges that students might have. Often we see this all the time, right? Completing and turning in their homework. That's like almost a teacher's, again, besides the messy desk, we hear often a real challenge that students have, or a real challenge that teachers have getting students to complete and turn in their homework and to do it on time. So again, we're crossing a few executive function strategies there, right? The setting the goals, managing your time, getting your tasks done, checking to make sure it's done. And again, helping students develop strategies that will work for them. Use another student example. A student, and I'm not sure if this is hopefully a good example, but we had this student that was always late with her homework, right? She never could get it on time. She would do it eventually. Often she had done it and just didn't hand it in. So it was in her locker or, on her table, wherever it happened to be. So we have been talking about using strategies, developing good strategies that work for yourself. She discovered that the best thing she could do was write on her hand an H and a W. So again, that's not probably the strategy I would have encouraged her to use, but if it's going to work for her, and her explanation was every time I look at my hand, and I have to look at it all the time, it reminds me, get your homework. So again, it's just helping kids develop strategies that work for them. So, and they're different for every student. All right, our final area here, and probably the most important thing, or the most important takeaway that you can take from this, metacognition. So metacognition is not included in our gear wheel. However, it is crucial to executive function. It's actually a proper executive function strategies really rely on metacognition or metacognitive awareness. Again, we think that students and adults would naturally be cognitively aware or metacognitively aware. However, that is not always the case, not at all. The whole key here to metacognition is helping students think about how they think. So So think about how they learn. Think about the strategies that they do use, understanding their learning profile. Michael's going to talk a little bit about how we can assess students or help students learn about their own learning, their own weaknesses and strengths. We talk about having a strength-based model, and we do feel that's very, very important. However, it's also important to know where your areas of weakness are, or where our students' areas of weaknesses are, so that they can develop strategies for, reducing the amount of weakness or challenge. So few ways that we can promote metacognitive awareness. First of all, just having your classroom be a metacognitive playground, really, for lack of a better way of saying it. Some of the ways we've seen teachers really promote metacognition is having it be visual, having it on your bulletin board, just like you would have a word wall. Have your words about executive function up there. We actually had a teacher, that put strategies on her board. She actually developed a strategy board. So like you would develop a strategy wall, a word wall, all the same, right? If you want them to learn strategies, you want it to be visual. So a big old bulletin board with lots of different strategies on it. And having students share their strategies and post them. Kids seem to really like that. This was actually a one that I just heard of too recently. If your classroom, if you use a lot of technology, a teacher actually created a Padlet, and she used the Padlet to have students share their strategies. So the kids could go on, and our kids are very technologically savvy for the most part. The kids could go on and post their strategies and share with each other. And, a lot of times, students will you may say a strategy, and it sounds much better when it comes from a friend. So kids tend to pick up and learn a lot from each other. The other piece, and we've talked about this a lot, is reflection. And that is by far the most powerful way for students to be, to think about how they learn, is just to be reflective learners. And again, as teachers, as educators, as parents, it's important for us to model how to be reflective. It's very important for students to see us struggle. So if you're using a strategy that is not working, share that. Share with your class that, oh, I forgot my lunch today. I know I should put my lunch by the door every morning before I leave. I really need to try a new strategy with that, right? Because I don't want to forget my lunch every day. So don't be afraid to really point out to them that you are also learning strategies, and that your strategies are always evolving. So a strategy that might work today may not work in 6 months or a year. So it's always about sort of enhancing your strategies. It might be about, abandoning a strategy that's not working and replacing it with a new strategy. But the bottom line is just always about being reflective and modeling great strategies.
Excellent. You ready for me to take it away, Kim? All right.
I am. Onward.
Excellent.
Thanks.
So Kim gave you a nice in-depth look at the different components in that gear, breakdown. I would just want to make a few kind of high-level points about executive function in general, so we can connect it to that idea of this being an empowering process. So look at this slide. Executive function processes are biological and developmental and are associated with the context in which children develop. So let's break that down. We know there are biological reasons why a student may struggle with executive function. If a kid has learning difference, if they have ADHD, they're almost guaranteed to struggle with executive function. But it's also developmental, right? We know that young kids struggle with things, teenagers struggle with a lot of executive function demands, and as adults we get better and better and better, right? So there's a developmental progression of executive function that's totally natural. But look at this last one, context, right? If you think about the two ages that are associated with the greatest leaps in executive function ability, early childhood and the entry into adolescence, a neuroscientist would tell you, oh, there's all these biological things going on. The synapses are, there's synaptic pruning and myelination of the axon sheaths and all that. But think about what's happening in the context. When a young child, when they're first, in that early childhood, that's when we first start treating them like little people. We're saying, okay, you're in timeout, or okay, this is your chore, or oh, I want you to clean up the milk yourself. We're giving them tasks that all of a sudden expect executive function abilities. Same thing with the entry into young adulthood and adolescence. We're saying, okay, now you've got 6 different classes. Now it's up to you to track your homework. So the development of the executive function is matched by the development of expectations in the context, right? And this is something that we can use because we cannot control our kids' biology, we cannot control their developmental age, but we can control the context. If you create context for your students that have appropriate demands of executive function with appropriate supports to achieve those demands, you're setting a context where your students are going to be successful when they're being asked to do executive function tasks. So hopefully we'll all remember this paradigm, the zone of proximal development, right? As kids move from things they can't do yet to things they can do with support to things they can do independently. If a student can't do something when it comes to executive function, then we need to do it for them. At our earliest ages, parents are their kids' prefrontal cortex. Parents do the executive function for them, and we don't think twice about it. As they get a little older, we start to help them do things with support. We show them how to use the vacuum cleaner. We show them how to pick out their clothes for the day. And eventually we expect that they can do those things independently. So as educators, we need to think about where our demands for our students fall on this chart. Students with a high level of executive function difficulty, there's a lot of things they can't do. We need to scaffold those things for them instead of letting them fall through the cracks. And that's what's happening when that funnel is clogged. We need to create context where the supports are built in so that the student is not getting a clogged funnel and they're able to show what they know in their classes. We've made this point a couple times, but I never get tired of saying it. Executive function is the foundation for the skills that a student will need as adults. That is why we're teaching it. When I have a student come to me with executive function difficulties, I'm not teaching them, oh, you're bad at this. I'm saying, in college, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Here are strategies so you can do it. As an adult, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Here are strategies so you can do it. And this is the modeling that Kim was talking about. And we could all do a much better job with this. When I get a new student, I ask them, how much time do you think your teacher spends organizing each week? So think about, what do you think your students would say if you ask them, how much time do I spend organizing each week? So I ask my students that, and they know that I'm trying to trick them because I'm not very subtle. And so they'll say 30 minutes because they think that that's a lot of time. Wow, 30 minutes of organization. How close is that to reality? Oh my gosh, it's way off. 30 minutes a day if you're lucky, if you're rushed and feeling lazy, okay? Our students don't know how much executive function we do as sophisticated and fancy adults, and we need to model that so that the one thing you do not want to hear when you're doing executive function is, I'm never going to use this stuff, right? Like they say for algebra. No, they are going to use this stuff, and they're going to use it every day, and you need to model it. My planner is always like right next to me, right? And I've got all the things I'm doing, and my students see it. So use your strategies transparently. Model them to your students so that they understand that this is what adults do. Now, explicit instruction is absolutely key to improving kids' executive function. This is a little controversial in the fact that there's other interventions out there. There's CogMed, there's Luminosity, there are these brain training games. Unfortunately, I don't find the research for those very compelling. To me, if you want a student to be able to do something when it comes to executive function, you need to model how it can be done successfully, perfectly for them. Let the students see how it's done and then give them a chance to try it and then come back to it. You can return to the strategy by modeling it again, by making a very clear connection to another assignment the student has in another class, by using discussion, by using key terms in your discussion, by using reflection opportunities, by putting it up on the wall, modifications of time and space. But whatever you do, make sure you start off with explicit instruction of the strategy. So before we go on to the next section, I just want to show a few kind of adorable examples of what happens when you're teaching executive function the right way. So we go from a place where the student is saying, oh, I'm so bad at this stuff, to a place where we ask students to draw it, and look what this kid drew. That's a brain, okay? And in the brain, there's check marks, question marks, and stars. And what he said to me is that when you think about a plan, you can think about the things that you can get done, check, 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 the things you can ace easily as a star, and the questions that you still have, separating out the tasks you have so you can get your work done. Here's another student who said executive function means envisioning the map of what you're going to do and then breaking down the steps and accomplishing things. These are students who understand that executive function is just a lens you can use use to accomplish the goals that you have. This is one of my favorites. So we ask students, we give them a little quiz and we ask them to pick different executive function strategies. So this girl says, I love self-checking. Do you see that? And that's the picture in the middle. She's leaving her house and she's saying, do I have everything? This is, by the way, this is leaving her parents' house. It's nothing to do with school. She's just thinking, when I walk out the door, do I have everything I need? And look at the far right. This is organization. No, ugh, I hate cleaning up, right? So this student has a deeper understanding of kind of what their executive function strengths and challenges are. All right, let's keep cruising. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about the ways that you can kind of measure executive function in a practical way so you have a plan moving forward. When we're talking about assessing executive function, there's a couple different goals that you might have. Whether you're trying to build that awareness of strengths and challenges, looking for gaps in the level of expected functioning and where they're actually at, setting your own priorities for what you want to teach, recommending accommodations for other teachers in the kid's life, or just tracking growth from pre and post. All of these are very appropriate goals for the assessment of executive function. This is a very pretty picture that is an fMRI picture from the brain. And if you've done your research on executive function, you know there's a lot of really awesome stuff coming out of fMRI. However, unless you have an fMRI in your office connected to the kid's brain while they're doing their work, this is not going to guide your work with your individual students right now. All right, it's beautiful, it looks very pretty, but we recommend the use of surveys and questionnaires. This is a list of some popular surveys and questionnaires that people use to gauge executive function. The DCAFs and the Brief are two very well-regarded surveys, and the Metacog is a survey that we've published here ourselves that we like to use to accomplish some of those tasks. Let me walk you through it quickly, and we're going to keep us moving. So, take a look at what the Metacog survey does, and we can see how this will inform those goals of assessment we talked about earlier. So we've got two strategies for the student. The student fills out a stratus asking them, well, what strategies do you use in your day-to-day life? And the me, how hard do you work in this area? How do you see yourself as a student? How do you think other people would see you? And then we have the teacher fill in a similar survey so we can map it on. When we score the survey, we're looking for discrepancies. Where did the student rate themselves high? Where did the student see their challenges? And how does the teacher view them? And here's what I really want you, if you have more questions of the survey, just email us later, but this is what I really want to show you. When I score my Metacog surveys, look what I'm able to pull out. The student says they work very hard. The student is very articulate. They know what subjects they love. They know they have a strong memory, and they're a very quick learner. They have a serious challenge with organization. They have a serious challenge with getting their homework done, and they have a problem studying for tests. So this accomplishes a lot of those goals that we mentioned earlier. Now I know the student's strengths and challenges. I can recommend certain strategies that the student should be taught. I can share this knowledge with the student to build self-awareness. I can recommend accommodations. And at the end of the year, I can reassess and see if I was able to show growth, right? So when you're picking your surveys or when you're trying to assess it, make sure you're hitting those goals. I mean, I love neuroscience, but I don't know how to teach the picture of the brain. I can use this survey to come up with concrete steps. And Kim said this very well, but you absolutely must be bringing in that metacognition piece. If you do not do that, you're basically teaching, your strategies are falling into a black hole, right? You need to connect the loop. The student needs to have a chance to reflect. If you don't, then the brain is not lighting up. If you teach a strategy and the student does exactly what you say, in theory, and you never get them to reflect on it, their prefrontal cortex doesn't light up and you aren't really promoting executive function. So here are a few very simple tools that you can use to promote executive function. We love strategy reflection sheets. That's this one on the left. I think that's going to be your left. A strategy reflection sheet just asks the student, what did you think of that strategy that I taught you? Did you like it? What are you going to use it for? Was it helpful, and why or why not? And by doing that, you're getting the student into a strategic mindset. So I work almost exclusively with teenage boys. So what do you think they say the first time I ask them, did you like that strategy? They say, no, I hated it. It was a waste of time. It took too much time. I would never do it again. And that's totally fine because I'm going to ask them why. Oh, it takes too much time. It doesn't match your learning style. Tell me more. And then every week, I'm going to be asking these same questions. Eventually, they're going to start saying things like, well, I like this strategy better than that strategy. Or I didn't use this strategy, I used that strategy. And this is giving them a chance to reflect and develop their own toolkit of strategies. So yes, you model strategies explicitly, but you give them a chance to put their 2 cents in. And the second page of the strategy portfolio, just collecting examples of student strategy work is also very powerful. It helps the students build their own repertoire of strategy instruction. To me, this belongs under the assessment piece because it's giving you, there's that formative assessment, a picture of the student's development of strategies as it happens. All right, let's keep moving. I wondered if we'd run out of time, and looks like we might. Let's just spend a little time talking about the best way of teaching executive function strategies. Now, this is just to go back to that point before. Teaching executive function can be controversial. There's actually a very interesting article by Amy Crawford in the Boston Globe back in 2015 where she says executive function is not worth the money. Now, I disagree with her very strongly, but if you read the article, she's talking about things like CogMed, luminosity, etc. And I can see where some of her concern is. So that's my second bullet point. It must be valid, which I mean ecologically valid. You must be teaching students strategies to accomplish the things they're actually doing in their lives. Instead of giving someone a strategy that, they're playing a video game to model shifting, I want to show students what shifting looks like in their actual day-to-day life. All right. So remember, you must teach strategies explicitly. And this is the paradigm of the transformation that you're going to accomplish when you teach these strategies. So Kim told some great stories. I want to tell one myself. I was living in Colorado. I had a student who used to be very good at math. He enters 9th grade. He's in geometry. And all of a sudden, we're getting Fs. He is just plummeting. So he's not, so metacognition, he has no idea what's happening. He's like, I guess I'm just dumb. I'm bad at math. Metacognition, out the window. Self-concept, in the garbage. Effort to work, total mess, right? And speaking of total mess, his backpack was a total mess. He had a backpack. He had no folders. He had no binders. He had nothing. All the papers, just like in a recycling center. So one day, we decided to clean out the backpack. As we're looking through it, we find something like 12 or 15 assignments that he did and never turned in, right? So we turn in those, all of a sudden his grade goes from an F to like a C-. It's like, wait a minute, maybe homework's the problem here. So this was a while ago, we didn't have smartphones, but every time he does homework, we take a picture of it with a digital camera. At the end of the week, we turn the pictures in to the teacher. All of a sudden, his grade is creeping up, creeping up, creeping up. He's like, this is easy. I'm good at math. I can take these tests. And by the end of the term, he's right on the B+, A- mark, and he's really motivated to study hard for that final, right? So that strategy helped him develop metacognition about who he is, improved his self-concept, and improved his effort. So that is why we want strategies, right? And we've said that word a lot. So before we end today, we need to define what is a strategy. And to do that, I'm going to ask you to play a game, right? So here's this I Spy. Go ahead and take a second or two. We don't have a ton of time, so I'm just going to give you a minute. I want you to go ahead and find all the hidden items in this picture. Go for it. Okay, so in the interest of time, let's jump in it. But I know that you can never go past this without finding all the things. So I don't know, did anyone find them all? Hopefully some of you did. I didn't give you much time. Kids are actually a lot faster at this than us crotchety adults. There's the stone statue down to the right. Patrick Star up on top near the smiley face. There's the smiley face right next to Patrick. The book is a sneaky one. It's a board book. It's in the bottom left corner. The lion, almost front and center. It's a profile of the lion, which is tricky. And the phone is underneath the smiley face. That's really tricky. So if I asked you guys, oh, how did you find the ones you found? I'm used to hearing things like, well, first I read the options and then I looked at the picture and checked off the easy ones. Or first I looked at the picture to get a lay of the land and then I read the options and checked off the ones I already found. Or I scanned the picture like a laser printer. Or I divided the picture into quadrants and scanned each quadrant. And when I hear adults or kids telling me those methods, I think about people like taking the SAT reading section. Oh, I read the passage and then I did the questions. I skimmed the questions and then I did the passage. I did the easy ones and then I went back and did the hard ones. And that is a strategy, right? When I ask my students, Kim mentioned a really good example of what's not a strategy, is when you have a highlighter and you highlight the whole thing. Right, the yellow page syndrome, that's not a strategy. So what's the difference between the yellow page syndrome and the method you use to solve this puzzle? Oops. So this is the ISEE test, and this is what you can use to tell if something is truly a strategy or not. To really be a strategy, it has to be individualized, has to match the way that the kid or yourself learns. It has to be systematic. It has to have the steps broken down. If you aren't breaking down the steps, you're not being strategic. And this is one to really push on with your students. That's a problem with highlighting everything. There's no steps. How'd you study for your test? I read my notes 6 times. We need students to break down the steps they're using to accomplish their goals. It needs to be more efficient. It helps students accomplish the work they're trying to do, and it needs to be more effective. Let's look at a sample or two. So here's Marcus. He's reading his science textbook, and he's taking notes that he's later going to turn into a study guide by changing section headings into questions. So is that an ISEE strategy? Let's take a look. Is it individualized? Absolutely. Marcus has his own note-taking system that he can use to change the section headings into questions, which is a great system. I never heard it before, so it's totally individualized. Is it systematic? Well, yes, it absolutely is. It has 3 steps. That's a number I love to push on, by the way. I want to know, what are the 3 steps you're going to take to accomplish the goal in front of you? And is it efficient? So here's where all my students like to argue with me. It's not efficient. It takes more time. Well, that's not true, though. It's extra efficient because while he's taking notes, he realizes he's studying for a test as well. And that is a frame of reference a lot of our students don't understand. We need to help them see things that way, right? A strategy helps you, accomplish multiple tasks at once because it's more efficient in that way. And is it effective? Well, you'd have to wait till it takes the test. But in this case, yes, Marcus aced it. Let's look at 2 more examples. I'm going to skip 2. We will send out a PDF of most of this. We might remove the student samples just for privacy, but I will send you the rest of this. So Dana is learning complex algebraic equations, and she confuses positives and negatives. So she uses different color highlighters to highlight the signs. Yes, it's individualized. It accomplishes a task that Dana knows is hard for her personally. Yes, it's systematic. It has the steps broken down. Yes, it's going to be more efficient. It will help her get the right answer. And yes, it's more effective, right? So Dana is using an ISEE strategy. Let's take a look at Mark. Mark has a science test tomorrow. He starts studying at 7, and to study, he reads and rereads the chapter in his notes. Is that ISEE? No, there's no awareness of what he needs to do for his own approach to a test. It's not systematic because the steps aren't broken down, so it's not going to be efficient, and it probably will not be a very effective strategy for him to study for the test. So I encourage you to take some time and look at these last 2 things, but you probably, as educators or parents or whatever brought you to us today, have different strategies that you like to use. I encourage you, use ISEE to really make sure you're touching that strategic learning piece. If you're using highlighters, if you're using flashcards, all of those things can be tools for good or tools that aren't all that strategic. Highlighters, flashcards, I got students who are doing like 300 flashcards, not strategic. So use that ISEE framework, and that will help you make sure that you're really using a strategy, an executive function strategy that's going to push your students to really develop those skills. And whatever you do, I don't know if we've said this enough today, do not forget to make time for reflection. Strategy reflection sheets, strategy shares, strategy questions. It could be just a simple question of asking students, what did you use? How? Did you like it? How did you know if you liked it or not? All right. So here are the different areas that we covered today. Right. I'm afraid we do not have time for questions. We went a little bit over. I apologize for that. I do want to point out a few things. Elizabeth, are you going to take us away on that?
Yes, I am.
All right, great. So take us home. I had a great time chatting with you guys. You'll see my email at the very end, okay? So reach out with those questions, and let's have Elizabeth take us home.
Okay, so also you guys have been a great audience. You guys have been really communicating. We really appreciate that. Because we don't have that much time for questions, never fear. Put any questions you have in the chat. I will get back to you and add them to this very chat window. As some of you have asked for, there will be a recording of this webinar up on this very page. It'll be exactly at this link, just like you were going to go log into the webinar. So they will be a recording there in about an hour. As we said, we're going to get you a PDF of the majority of the slides. We will email that out to you. So don't worry about that. We'll get back to you on that. Also, I just want to let you know we have a lot of really great content. Follow us on Twitter. We have 2 Twitter accounts, Smarts Online and Research ILD.org. Probably Smarts Online is the more active one. We have a great Facebook page. We also, on our Smarts website, we have a blogs that we put out every single week, and those are all free content, so you don't have to be part of the SMARTS program. You can just go check it out. So we have a lot of things about new stuff that's coming up in education. We have a lot of recommendations for things that you can use in your classroom. I just said that question about the CEU certificates. I will get back to you on that. I'm going to, in the chat, actually put the links to our Facebook and our Twitter and on the website, just so that you can sort of hyperlink and just click on those, make it a little bit easier if you like that. So I think that's all we have. Anybody else? Mako? Kim? All right.
No, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you share your work with us. We love to see what the teachers are doing out there, all the wonderful work you're doing.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. We will also be sending you a follow-up email where we probably will ask you a little bit about how we can improve our webinars for the future and what other content that you're looking into. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time here at Research ILD. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.